It was called the Guardian's Acknowledgement given to someone Part 5. Consequences and Connections. Jiwan stared at Ambassador Tala, trying to process what had just been asked. Raise a Valrine cub? Help parent a child from a completely different species? The weight of the responsibility felt crushing. She looked down at the small creature pressed against her leg. The cub looked back with complete trust. In the few days they had spent together, this tiny being had come to depend on her. Breaking that bond would hurt them both. Yes, Jiwan heard herself say. I'll help. The chamber exploded with reactions. Some delegates looked shocked. Others seemed angry. But many appeared moved by what they had just witnessed. Captain Hyunwoo stood with his arms crossed, a slight smile on his stern face. The Valrine elders gathered around Ambassador Tala, speaking rapidly in their own language. The conversation was clearly heated. Some of them gestured at Jiwan with what looked like disapproval. But Ambassador Tala stood firm, her voice calm but unyielding. Finally, the eldest of the Valrine delegation stepped forward. His fur was gray with age, and his eyes held decades of wisdom. He studied Jiwan carefully. Human Jiwan, he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. Do you understand what you are agreeing to? Valrine cubs require specific care, specific teaching. Their dietary needs, their social development, their training in our customs and ways. This is not a simple commitment. I understand it won't be easy, Jiwan replied, but I'm willing to learn. I'll do whatever is necessary to help this cub grow up healthy and happy. The elder looked at Ambassador Tala. You are certain about this, Tala? Truly certain? Look at my daughter, Ambassador Tala said softly. Look at how she stands with the human. She chose this person as her protector. What kind of mother would I be if I ignored my child's choice? The elder was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. Very well. Let the record show that human G1 has been acknowledged as shield parent to Ambassador Tala's daughter. May this bond bring strength to both families and understanding between our peoples. Over the following days, life on Horizon's Gate slowly returned to normal. Krell was held in confinement awaiting trial. The investigation into his conspiracy with the Therox Consortium expanded, revealing several other individuals involved in the plot. Station security worked around the clock to unravel the full extent of the scheme. For Jiwan, everything changed. Her small quarters were modified to accommodate both human and Valrine needs. One wall was installed with climbing structures, as Valrine cubs naturally love to climb. Special heating elements were added because Valrine preferred warmer temperatures than humans. A small area was sectioned off with the proper equipment for the cubs' specific dietary requirements. Ambassador Tala visited every day. At first, the cub was hesitant around her mother, still remembering the fear and trauma, but slowly, with patience and gentle persistence, the bond between mother and daughter began to reform. Jiwan watched these reunions with mixed feelings. She was happy to see them reconnecting, but she also felt a strange sense of loss. The cub was not really hers. You are thinking too much, Ambassador Tala said one evening. They were sitting together, watching the cub play with a puzzle toy designed to stimulate young Valrine minds. I'm just worried, Jiwan admitted. What if I do something wrong? What if I can't give her what she needs? You have already given her something precious, the ambassador replied. Safety and love when she needed it most. The rest we will teach you. And teach her they did. Ambassador Tala spent hours explaining Valrine child-rearing practices. Jiwan learned about the proper foods for growing cubs, the importance of play-fighting and developing hunting instincts, the specific sounds that meant different things in Valrine communication. Minji often joined these lessons, fascinated by the chance to learn about another species so intimately. You're basically getting a degree in Valrine studies, she joked one day. Except your textbook is alive and keeps chewing on your furniture. It was true. The cub was growing quickly and becoming more active every day. She had started making a game of pouncing on anything that moved, which meant Jiwan's feet were frequent targets. The small creature would hide behind furniture and leap out with a tiny roar that was more cute than frightening. Dongyun stopped by regularly as well. He had been officially commended for his role in uncovering the conspiracy. Captain Hyunwoo had put him in charge of improving security protocols to prevent similar incidents in the future. You're famous now, Donghyun told Jiwan one day. People all over the station are talking about the human who saved a Valrine cub. Some of the other species are actually being friendlier to humans because of you. It was true. Jiwon noticed the change whenever she walked through the station corridors. Beings who previously avoided humans now nodded in greeting. Some even stopped to ask about the cub. The story had spread quickly, and with it a new perception of what humans were capable of. One particularly meaningful visit came from a Valrine warrior named Surak. He was one of the soldiers who had conducted the aggressive searches during the crisis. He asked to speak with Jiwon privately. "I must apologize," Surak said, his massive form somehow managing to look humble. "During the searches, I believed humans had taken the cub for cruel purposes. I thought the worst of your species. But you proved me wrong. You showed more honor and compassion than many of my own kind." "You were protecting a child," Jiwon said. "I understand why you were so aggressive. Still, I judged wrongly," Surak replied. He performed a formal Valrine bow. "I hope in the future I will not make such errors. You have taught me something valuable." As weeks passed, the cub grew and developed. Ambassador Tala suggested they give her a proper name. In Valrine culture, cubs were not formally named until they survived their first season and their personality began to emerge. They chose the name Nara, which in the Valrine language meant brave little one. It seemed fitting for a cub who had survived an attack and found the courage to trust. Again, Nara was speaking now, using simple words in both Valrine and human language. Her favorite word was Jiwon, which she said constantly, usually while demanding attention or food. Ambassador Tala taught her to call Jiwon Shield Mother, a term of deep affection and respect. The shared guardianship was working better than anyone expected. Jiwon handled most of Nara's daily care since the cub still preferred to sleep beside her pillow every night. Ambassador Tala focused on teaching Nara about Valrine history and culture, skills she would need to navigate Valrine society. They established routines. Mornings were for lessons with Ambassador Tala, learning language and customs. Afternoons were with Jiwon in the laboratory, where Nara watched her work and asked endless questions about the plants and samples. Evenings were family time with both of Nara's parents together. One evening, Captain Hyunwoo requested a meeting with Jiwon and Ambassador Tala. They arrived at his office to find several other high-ranking officials present, including delegates from multiple species. "Please sit," Captain Hyunwoo said. "We have a proposal we would like to discuss with you." The officials explained that the Alliance Council had been watching the situation on Horizon's Gate closely. They had seen how the crisis was resolved and how the relationship between Jiwon and Ambassador Tala was developing. It had given them an idea. "We want to create a formal program," one of the council members explained. "Cross-species cultural exchange positions where individuals from different worlds live and work together for extended periods. Not just diplomatic meetings, but genuine integration. Learning each other's ways, building real understanding." "And you want us to be the first participants?" Ambassador Tala asked. "You already are in a way," the council member replied. "You've proven the concept works. Now we want to expand it. We're calling it Project Guardian Kin in honor of the bond you've created." Jiwon felt overwhelmed. "You want to use us as a model? But we're still figuring this out ourselves. We make mistakes all the time." "That's exactly why you're perfect," Captain Hyunwoo said with a slight smile. "You're not presenting some impossible ideal. You're showing that different species can work together, learn together, and build relationships despite difficulties. That's the message the Alliance needs right now." Ambassador Tala looked thoughtful. "This program could help prevent future conspiracies like Krell's. If more individuals from different species truly understand each other, it becomes harder to turn them into enemies." "That's our hope," the council member said. They spent the next hour discussing the details of the program. It would start small, with carefully selected participants from different species. Each pair would be matched based on compatible personalities and complementary skills. They would live together, work together, and learn each other's cultures deeply. As they left the meeting, Jiwon felt both excited and nervous. This was bigger than she had ever imagined. Her simple act of helping an injured cub was becoming something that could change relationships throughout the galaxy. Back in her quarters, Nara was waiting. The cub had grown significantly. She was now about the size of a medium dog, with the distinctive features of Valrine adolescence beginning to show. Her coat was becoming more lustrous and her movements were more graceful and controlled. "Shield Mother," Nara chirped happily. "War?" Part 4. The confrontation. The main diplomatic chamber was packed. Representatives from every major species on Horizon's Gate had been summoned to the emergency session. The circular room was designed for such gatherings, with seating arranged in tiers so everyone could see the center floor. The air felt thick with tension and curiosity. Ambassador Tala sat in the Valrine section, surrounded by her warriors. She looked exhausted and grief-stricken. Her normally groomed fur was unkempt, and her eyes held a desperate hope that was painful to see. 3 days of searching for her daughter had clearly taken a terrible toll. Krell sat several seats away from the ambassador, his expression carefully neutral. He looked calm and composed, showing none of the stress that marked Tala's features. Dongyun had positioned himself where he could watch Krell closely. Captain Hyunwoo stood in the center of the chamber, his dress uniform crisp and formal. He waited for the room to quiet before speaking. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," the captain began. "I know the past days have been difficult for everyone. The disappearance of Ambassador Tala's daughter has affected us all. Today I have called you here because new evidence has come to light regarding this situation." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Ambassador Tala leaned forward, her claws gripping the armrests of her seat so hard they left marks. "What evidence?" she demanded. Her voice was rough with emotion. "Have you found my daughter?" "We have," Captain Hyunwoo said. "And we have also uncovered disturbing information about how she came to be missing." The captain signaled to the chamber doors. They slid open and Ji-won entered. She was carrying a small container in her arms. Every eye in the room fixed on her. She could feel the weight of their stares, the suspicion and confusion from dozens of different species. Ji-won walked to the center of the chamber, her legs shaking, but her steps steady. She stopped beside Captain Hyunwoo and carefully set down the container. "Before I open this," the captain said, "I want everyone to understand the context. Several days ago, a young human researcher named Ji-won returned to her quarters to find an injured Valrine cub hiding in her room. The chamber exploded into noise. Valrine warriors roared in anger. Other species began shouting questions. Ambassador Tala stood up, her massive form trembling with rage. "You had my daughter," the ambassador's voice boomed through the chamber. "You humans took my child?" Captain Hyunwoo raised his hands for silence. "Please, Ambassador, let me explain everything before you judge." It took several minutes for order to be restored. Ambassador Tala remained standing, her entire body tense with barely controlled fury. Ji-won stood frozen, trying not to show how terrified she felt. The captain began laying out the evidence. He showed the security footage of Krell chasing the cub through the maintenance tunnels. He displayed the communication logs proving Krell's meetings with the Therox Consortium. He explained the timeline of events and how Ji-won had found the cub injured and afraid. "These accusations are ridiculous," Krell said, standing up. His voice was smooth and confident. "This is clearly a human plot to create division among our people. They steal a cub, fabricate evidence, and now try to blame me for their crimes." Several delegates nodded in agreement. The humans had a reputation for being unpredictable. It was not hard to believe they might do something this foolish. "The evidence shows me following the cub, yes," Krell continued, "but I was trying to help. The cub had wandered into a restricted area. I was attempting to return her to her mother when she fled from me. That is all." "And the meetings with the Therox?" Captain Hyunwoo asked. "Diplomatic discussions," Krell said smoothly. "Not all conversations need to be public. The Therox have a right to express their concerns about the alliance, and I have a right to listen." Ambassador Tala looked between Krell and Captain Hyunwoo, confusion and pain clear on her face. "I want my daughter," she said, her voice breaking. "Give her to me now." Captain Hyunwoo nodded to Ji-won. "Open the container." Ji-won's hands trembled as she unsealed the container. She lifted the top carefully, revealing the small Valrine cub inside. The cub had been sleeping, but the noise and light woke her. She sat up, blinking her large golden eyes. For a moment, the entire chamber fell silent. Every being present stared at the tiny creature. Ambassador Tala made a sound that was part sob, part roar. "My baby," she whispered. Then louder, "My baby." The cub's ears perked up at her mother's voice. She looked around the huge chamber, clearly overwhelmed by all the beings staring at her. Her small body began to tremble. Ambassador Tala called to her daughter in the Valrine language, her voice full of love and relief. The cub turned toward the sound. Every instinct should have sent her running to her mother. That was the natural behavior for a Valrine cub when frightened and finding its parent. But then the cub's gaze landed on Krell. The reaction was instant and visceral. The small creature's eyes went wide with terror. Her ears flattened against her head. The fur along her spine stood up, and she made a sound that no one in the chamber had heard before, a high-pitched shriek of pure fear. The cub scrambled backward so fast she nearly fell. She was trying to get away from Krell, her small claws scrabbling at the bottom of the container. Every line of her tiny body screamed danger and terror, and then she did something that shocked everyone in the room. Instead of running to her mother, the cub jumped out of the container and ran behind Jiwon. She pressed herself against the back of Jiwon's legs, trembling violently, making small whimpering sounds of distress. The chamber erupted into chaos. Valrine warriors roared. Other delegates shouted. But through all the noise, one thing was absolutely clear to everyone present. The cub was not afraid of humans. She was terrified of Krell. Ambassador Tala's face transformed from grief to understanding to absolute rage in seconds. She moved faster than something her size should be able to move, crossing the chamber in 3 massive bounds. Krell tried to back away, but Valrine warriors blocked his escape. "You," Ambassador Tala snarled, getting right in Krell's face. "You harmed my child. You dared to hurt a cub." "This proves nothing," Krell said, but his voice had lost its confidence. "The cub is confused, frightened by all the noise and attention. Valrine cubs do not make mistakes about threats," one of the elder Valrine delegates said, standing up. "Their survival instincts are perfect. If the cub fears you, there is a reason." Ambassador Tala looked at her daughter, still hiding behind Jiwon. The small cub peeked out, saw her mother, and made a soft chirping sound. But she did not move from her position of safety. "Why?" the ambassador asked, her voice full of pain. "Why would you harm an innocent child?" "My child?" Krell's careful composure finally cracked. Perhaps he realized he was trapped, that the evidence and the cub's reaction had condemned him. Or perhaps he simply stopped caring. "Because you are weak," he said coldly. "You want to make peace with these humans, these Deathworlders who should be our enemies. You want to bind our people to lesser species. I tried to stop you the political way, but you would not listen. So I decided to create an incident that would destroy any chance of your precious alliance." The chamber fell completely silent. Krell had just confessed to everything. The plan was simple, he continued, a bitter smile on his face. "Harm your cub and make it appear that humans were responsible. The outrage would destroy human-Valrine relations forever. But the stupid creature escaped before I could finish the job." Ambassador Tala let out a roar that shook the walls. Her claws extended, and for a moment it looked like she would kill Krell right there in the diplomatic chamber. But she controlled herself, stepping back with visible effort. "You will be tried under Valrine law," she said, her voice deadly quiet. "The punishment for harming a cub is exile at minimum, death at maximum. You have brought eternal shame to yourself and your family line." Valrine warriors seized Krell. He did not resist. Perhaps he knew resistance was pointless, or perhaps he simply did not care anymore. They dragged him from the chamber while he shouted about how the Alliance would destroy Valrine culture and strength. When the chamber doors closed behind him, Ambassador Tala turned to face Jiwon. The human woman stood frozen, still protecting the small cub behind her legs. The ambassador walked toward them slowly, and Jiwon had to fight every instinct that told her to run. The massive Valrine stopped a few feet away. She looked down at her daughter, then at Jiwon. The ambassador's expression was unreadable. "You saved my child," Ambassador Tala said quietly. "You found her injured and afraid, and instead of immediately seeking reward or recognition, you protected her. You risked your career, your safety, and potentially your life to keep her from harm." "I couldn't just ignore her," Jiwon said, her voice shaking. She was hurt and alone. "Most beings would have turned her over immediately," the ambassador said. "But you humans are strange. You form bonds across species boundaries. You protect the helpless even when it costs you. I have heard stories of this, but I did not truly believe them until now." The ambassador lowered herself to one knee, bringing her face level with Jiwon's. Then she did something extraordinary. She pressed her forehead gently against Jiwon's forehead. The chamber was silent. Every being present recognized the gesture. It was a Valrine sign of deep respect and gratitude, reserved for only the most honored individuals. The small creature's golden eyes looked back at her with complete trust. She had started this trying to protect Opart 3, uncovering the truth Minji found Dongyun in the security office during his break. She asked him to meet her in one of the empty conference rooms, claiming she had information about a communications issue. Dong-Yun arrived looking tired and stressed. The searches for the missing cub had everyone working double shifts. "What's this about, Minji?" he asked, settling into a chair. "I need to show you something," Minji said. "But you have to promise to hear the whole story before you react." Dong-Yun's eyes narrowed. "That's not how security work functions. If you know something about the missing cub, just promise," Minji interrupted. "Please, Dong-Yun. This is important." He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, show me." Minji pulled up the security footage on her datapad. She showed him the images of Krell chasing the cub through the maintenance tunnels. She showed him the injury on the small creature. And finally, she told him where the cub was now. Dong-Yun's face went pale. "Minji, do you understand what you're telling me? You and Ji-won are hiding Ambassador Tala's daughter. The entire station is on the edge of war because of this." "I know," Minji said. "But look at the footage again. Really look at it. Why would Krell be chasing a cub? Why would he hurt her?" Dong-Yun watched the footage several more times. His expression changed from anger to confusion to concern. "This doesn't make sense. Valrine adults are protective of all cubs, not just their own. It's built into their biology. Krell shouldn't be capable of harming a child. Unless he had a very strong reason," Minji said quietly. "What kind of reason could possibly justify this? That's what we need to find out." Dong-Yun was quiet for a long time. Finally, he looked up at Minji. "Take me to see the cub. I need to verify this for myself." They went to Ji-won's quarters together. When they entered, they found Ji-won sitting on the floor with the cub. The small Valrine was playing with a piece of cord, pouncing on it like it was prey. Despite the serious situation, the scene was almost peaceful. The cub looked up when Dong-Hyun entered. It tilted its head, studying the new human with curiosity. Then it chirped and went back to playing. "Hello there," Dong-Hyun said softly. He knelt down slowly, making himself less threatening. The cub watched him but did not seem afraid. After a moment, it walked over and sniffed his hand. Dong-Hyun examined the bandage on the cub's side carefully. His jaw tightened. "This was deliberately inflicted. The wound is too clean, too precise." He looked up at Ji-won. "How did she end up in your quarters?" Ji-won explained everything from the beginning. Finding the cub, treating its injury, her decision to wait before reporting it. As she talked, Dong-Hyun listened without interrupting. "You should have come to security immediately," he said when she finished. But his voice was not as harsh as it could have been. "But I understand why you didn't. If Krell did this, turning the cub in might have put her in more danger." "So you'll help us?" Ji-won asked. Dong-Hyun sighed heavily. "I'm probably going to lose my job over this. But yes, I'll help. We need to find out what Krell is involved in and why he would target this cub." Over the next 2 days, the three humans worked together in secret. Dong-Hyun used his security access to pull communication logs and meeting schedules. Minji analyzed data patterns looking for anything unusual. Ji-won cared for the cub and researched Valrine behavior and culture. The cub was growing more comfortable with all three of them. She had started following Ji-won everywhere, chirping happily whenever Ji-won entered the room. At night, the small creature still insisted on sleeping curled beside Ji-won's pillow, just as she had that first night. "She's bonded to you," Dong-Hyun observed one evening. "I've been reading about Valrine cubs. They form strong attachments during their first year. She sees you as family now." Ji-won looked down at the cub sleeping peacefully in her lap. The idea was both wonderful and terrifying. This tiny creature trusted her completely. "Found something," Minji announced suddenly. She had been working on her datapad for hours. "Krell has been having private meetings with representatives from the Therox Consortium." Dong-Hyun's expression darkened. "The Therox Consortium opposes the peace treaties between species. They want the alliance to fail." "Exactly," Minji said. "And look at when these meetings started. 3 months ago, right after Ambassador Tala began negotiating for stronger cooperation between Valrine and human colonies. The pieces started to come together. Krell was working against the ambassador. He wanted to sabotage the peace process. But how did the cub fit into this?" "The cub must have seen something," Ji-won said slowly. "What if she wandered into one of Krell's secret meetings?" "A witness," Dong-Hyun said. "Even a cub witness could be dangerous if she were old enough to remember faces and sounds." "Valrine cubs have excellent memories, so Krell tried to silence her," Minji finished. "But the cub escaped. It was a horrifying theory, but it fit all the facts." Donghyun pulled up more security footage, this time focusing on areas near where the cub had first appeared. After hours of searching, they found what they were looking for. The footage showed a maintenance room deep in the station's lower levels. Krell was there, meeting with 3 beings from other species. One of them was Therox. The conversation was not recorded, but their body language was clear. This was a conspiracy, and in the corner of the footage, barely visible, was a small shape. The cub had been hiding behind some equipment watching. "We have evidence," Donghyun said, "but it's not enough." This footage shows Krell meeting with Therox representatives, which is suspicious but not illegal. And the clip of him chasing the cub could be explained away. He could claim he was trying to help her. "What about the wound?" Ji-won asked. "Without a medical witness who saw Krell inflict it, it's just circumstantial. We need something definitive." Minji looked thoughtful. "What if the cub could identify Krell? Valrine cubs might not be able to speak yet, but they can communicate fear and recognition. If we brought the cub near Krell in a controlled situation, her reaction might be proof enough." "That's incredibly risky," Donghyun said. "We'd have to reveal that we've had the cub all along, and if we're wrong, or if the evidence isn't convincing enough, we'll face serious consequences. But if we're right," Ji-won said, "we could stop whatever Krell is planning and protect this cub permanently." They debated long into the night. The situation was getting more dangerous every day. Ambassador Tala had given the station 3 more days to find her daughter, or she would withdraw the Valrine from the Alliance. The deadline was approaching fast. Finally, Donghyun made a decision. "I need to bring this to Captain Hyunwoo. He's the ranking human officer on the station. If anyone can help us, it's him. Can we trust him?" Ji-won asked. "He's a good man," Donghyun said. "Fair and smart. But he's also very strict about protocol. This situation is going to test him." The next morning, Donghyun arranged a private meeting with Captain Hyunwoo. The captain was a stern man in his 50s with gray hair and sharp eyes. He listened to their entire story without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When they finished, Captain Hyunwoo sat back in his chair. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly. You 3 have been hiding Ambassador Tala's cub for days. You've been conducting unauthorized investigations, and now you want me to believe that a respected member of the Valrine delegation is a traitor, working with the Therox Consortium?" "Yes, sir," Donghyun said. "Show me everything you've found." They presented all their evidence. The security footage, the communication logs, the analysis of Krell's meetings and movements. Captain Hyunwoo studied every detail carefully. The silence in the room was heavy. Finally, the captain spoke. "This is compelling, but you're right that it's not definitive. Krell has allies and influence. If we accuse him without absolute proof, it could make everything worse. What if we arranged a situation where Krell's true nature would be revealed?" Donghyun suggested. "A diplomatic meeting where all the major delegates are present, including Ambassador Tala. And bring in the cub?"
Captain Hyunwoo said.
"Use her reaction as evidence?" "It's not perfect," Donghyun admitted, "but it might be our only chance." Captain Hyunwoo was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at Ji-won. "Bring the cub here. I want to see her for myself." Ji-won left and returned with the small Valrine cub. The creature looked around the captain's office with wide eyes, taking in all the new sights and sounds. Captain Hyunwoo watched as the cub immediately went to Ji-won's side, pressing against her leg and chirping softly. "She's bonded to you," the captain observed. "Yes, sir," Ji-won said quietly. Captain Hyunwoo knelt down and held out his hand to the cub. The small creature sniffed it cautiously, then allowed him to gently touch her head. The captain's stern expression softened slightly. "You've been taking good care of her," he said, "but you all understand the seriousness of what you've done. This could end your careers. It could cause a diplomatic disaster." "We understand, sir," they said together. The captain stood up. "All right. I'm going to arrange an emergency diplomatic session. I'll claim we have new evidence about the cub's disappearance. We'll get everyone in one room, including Krell and Ambassador Tala." He looked at each of them seriously. "But if this plan fails, you'll all face serious consequences. Are you Part 1. The intruder Ji-won's shoulders ached as she pressed her thumb against the door panel. The small light blinked green and the door to her quarters slid open with a soft hiss. She stepped inside the cramped room and let out a long breath. 14 hours in the xenobiology lab had left her exhausted. Her eyes felt heavy, and all she wanted was to collapse onto her bunk and sleep for the next 10 hours. The research station Horizon's Gate floated silently in orbit around a newly discovered planet. Jiwan had been working here for 8 months now, studying alien plant samples and cataloging their properties. The station housed over 300 beings from dozens of different species. Most of them kept their distance from humans. Jiwan understood why. Humans came from Earth, a world that other species called a death world because of its harsh conditions. Other species thought humans were dangerous and unpredictable. She kicked off her boots and tossed her datapad onto the small desk. The room was barely large enough for a bed, a desk, and a tiny bathroom. But it was hers, and right now it looked perfect. She pulled her hair out of its tie and rubbed her tired eyes. That was when she noticed something wrong. There was a sound. A soft, high-pitched whimpering coming from near her pillow. Jiwan froze. Her hand moved slowly toward the emergency call button on the wall. Living on a station with dozens of alien species meant unexpected visitors were rarely good news. She took a careful step toward her bunk. The whimpering grew louder. Something small was moving under her blanket. Jiwan grabbed the edge of the fabric and pulled it back quickly. A tiny creature lay curled beside her pillow. It was covered in soft silver fur that seemed to shimmer under the room's dim lights. The creature was roughly the size of a house cat with a long tail and small pointed ears. Its eyes were squeezed shut and it was trembling. Jiwan's breath caught in her throat. She recognized this species immediately. Valrine. The creature was a Valrine cub, and that meant serious trouble. Adult Valrine were massive beings, standing nearly 8 feet tall with powerful muscles and sharp claws. They looked like a cross between a big cat and something even more dangerous. On the station, the Valrine delegation kept to themselves and made it very clear they did not appreciate other species getting near their young. Having a Valrine cub in her quarters could be seen as theft or even kidnapping. Jiwan should have hit the call button immediately. She should have contacted security and explained the situation. But as she looked at the tiny creature, she noticed something that made her pause. The cub had a wound along its side. The fur was matted with dried blood, and the cut looked recent and painful. The cub opened its eyes. They were large and golden, filled with fear. It made another soft whimpering sound and tried to press itself further into the corner of the bunk. It was terrified. Jiwan's training as a xenobiologist kicked in. She moved slowly, keeping her hands visible and her movements calm. She spoke in a soft voice, even though she knew the cub probably could not understand her words. Tone mattered more than language when dealing with frightened animals. "It's okay," she whispered. "I'm not going to hurt you." The cub watched her with wide eyes. Its small chest rose and fell rapidly. Jiwan reached for her medical kit, the one she kept for fieldwork. She opened it carefully, making sure not to make any sudden movements. Inside were basic supplies including antiseptic, bandages, and a scanner. She held out her hand toward the cub, palm up and empty. The creature sniffed the air, its small nose twitching. Then without warning, it hissed and swiped at her with one tiny paw. Jiwan jerked her hand back just in time. The cub's claws were small but sharp. Okay, Jiwan said quietly. "You're scared. I understand." She sat down on the floor, making herself smaller and less threatening. She placed the medical kit between them and simply waited. Minutes passed. The cub watched her constantly, but slowly its breathing began to calm. Jiwan did not move. She just sat there, letting the creature get used to her presence. After what felt like forever, the cub shifted slightly. It winced as the movement pulled at its injured side. That seemed to make up its mind. The small creature slowly, carefully crept toward the medical kit. It sniffed at the supplies, then looked up at Jiwan with those big golden eyes. Jiwan moved very slowly. She picked up the scanner and showed it to the cub, letting it see that the device was harmless. Then she gently ran the scanner over the wound. The readout showed that the cut was not deep enough to be life-threatening, but it was definitely causing pain and could get infected if left untreated. "I need to clean this," Jiwan said softly. "It's going to sting a little, but it will help. Can you trust me?" The cub stared at her. Then, impossibly, it seemed to understand. It lay down and extended its side toward her, offering access to the wound. Jiwan's hands trembled slightly as she prepared the antiseptic. She had studied dozens of alien species, but she had never been this close to a Valrine before, especially not a baby. She cleaned the wound as gently as possible. The cub flinched and made small sounds of distress, but it did not try to run or attack. Jiwan worked quickly, applying medicine and wrapping a bandage around the small body. The cub was so tiny that the bandage looked comically large. When she finished, Ji-won sat back. The cub looked at its bandage side, then looked up at her. Something had changed in its eyes. The fear was still there, but there was something else now, too. Something that looked like trust. Ji-won's stomach rumbled, reminding her that she had not eaten in hours. She stood up carefully and went to her small food storage. She pulled out one of her protein rations, broke off a piece, and offered it to the cub. The creature sniffed at the food suspiciously. Then it snatched the piece from her hand and ate it in 2 quick bites. Ji-won smiled and offered another piece. The cub ate that one too, and a third and a fourth. It was clearly starving. As the cub ate, Ji-won's mind raced. How had this creature ended up in her quarters? Why was it alone and injured? Where was its mother? The Valrine were fiercely protective of their young. A cub this small should never be wandering the station by itself. Something was very wrong. The cub finished eating and looked up at her again. This time it made a different sound. Not a whimper or a hiss, but a soft chirping noise. Then, to Ji-won's complete surprise, it walked over to her and pressed its small head against her leg. Ji-won reached down slowly and gently touched the top of the cub's head. The fur was incredibly soft. The cub made that chirping sound again and leaned into her touch. "What happened to you?" Ji-won whispered. The cub could not answer, of course. But as it looked up at her with those trusting golden eyes, Ji-won made a decision. She could not report this yet. Not until she understood what was going on. The cub's injuries were not accidental. The pattern of the wound looked deliberate. Someone had hurt this baby on purpose. If she reported finding the cub now, it might be returned to whoever had harmed it. Ji-won could not let that happen. She looked at the door, then back at the small creature now curling up on her bunk. She was probably making a huge mistake. She could lose her position on the station. She could cause a diplomatic incident. But as she watched the exhausted cub finally close its eyes and drift toward sleep, she knew she could not make any other choice. Just for tonight, she told herself. Tomorrow I'll figure out what to do. The cub's breathing slowed and deepened as it fell asleep. Ji-won sat at her desk and pulled up the station's public records on her datapad. She needed to learn everything she could about Valrine cubs and why one might be alone and injured. She worked through the night, researching and planning while the small creature slept peacefully beside her pillow. Outside her window, stars drifted past in the endless dark. Ji-won had no idea that this one choice, this one moment of compassion, was about to change everything. Part 2, The Search. The alarm woke Ji-won from a restless sleep. The sound was harsh and loud, echoing through the station's corridors. She sat up quickly, her heart pounding. Beside her, the small Valrine cub jerked awake and made a frightened chirping noise. Ji-won grabbed her datapad from the desk. Emergency messages were flooding the station's communication system. She read the first one and felt her stomach drop. Alert, missing Valrine cub. All personnel report any sightings immediately. This is a critical diplomatic situation. The message went on to explain that the cub belonged to Ambassador Tala, one of the highest-ranking Valrine diplomats on the station. The cub had disappeared sometime during the night cycle. Security was conducting searches throughout all sections of Horizon's Gate. Ji-won looked at the small creature on her bunk. The cub stared back at her with those large golden eyes, completely unaware of the chaos it had caused. "What am I going to do with you?" Ji-won whispered. She should go to security right now. She should explain that she found the cub injured in her quarters. But something stopped her. The wound on the cub's side bothered her. It was too precise, too deliberate. And if the cub had simply wandered away from its mother, why was it hurt? Why had it been alone? Ji-won made the cub comfortable in a storage container with soft bedding, giving it more food and water. Then she left for her shift, trying to act as normal as possible. The station was in complete chaos. Valrine warriors were everywhere, searching rooms and questioning everyone they encountered. Their massive forms moved through the corridors with barely controlled anger. Other species pressed themselves against walls to let the Valrine pass, fear obvious in their expressions. Everyone knew that an angry Valrine was extremely dangerous. In the laboratory, Ji-won's co-workers talked about nothing else. A human man named Tae-hyung from the engineering section was telling anyone who would listen about the searches. "They think someone took the cub," Tae-hyung said, his voice low. "The Valrine are convinced it was kidnapped. They're focusing their search on the human quarters." "Why would they think a human did this?" asked another researcher, a woman named Unji. "Because of our reputation," Tae-hyung explained. Other species think humans are unpredictable. They know we have this weird habit of forming bonds with animals from other worlds. The Valrine think maybe some human wanted a Valrine cub as a pet. Jiwan felt sick. She was not keeping the cub as a pet. She was trying to protect it. But how could she explain that without revealing what she knew? She tried to focus on her work, but it was impossible. Through the laboratory windows, she could see Valrine warriors moving past, their expressions grim. Ambassador Tala herself appeared at one point, and Jiwan got her first look at the cub's mother. The ambassador was enormous and intimidating. Her silver fur was marked with dark stripes, and her eyes held a mixture of rage and desperate worry. She was speaking to the station's head of security, her voice carrying even through the thick glass. "If my daughter is not returned safely, this will be considered an act of war," the ambassador said. Her voice was deep and dangerous. "The Valrine will withdraw from all alliance treaties. Is that understood?" Jiwan's hand shook as she tried to work. This was worse than she had imagined. She was not just risking her job anymore. She was risking the peace between entire species. Her shift finally ended, and Jiwan hurried back to her quarters. She needed to think. She needed to figure out what to do. But when she reached her door, she found someone waiting for her. Minji, her roommate, stood in the hallway with her arms crossed. Minji worked in the station's communications department and was supposed to be on a different shift schedule. She should not have been here. "We need to talk," Minji said quietly. Inside, Jiwan's mind raced as she opened the door. Had Minji figured it out? The two women stepped into the quarters together. As soon as the door closed, the Valrine cub poked its head out of the storage container and chirped happily at seeing Jiwan. Minji stared at the cub. Then she stared at Jiwan. Then she looked back at the cub again. "Please tell me that is not what I think it is," Minji said slowly. Jiwan sighed. "I can explain." "You have Ambassador Tala's missing cub in our quarters," Minji said, her voice rising. "Jiwan, do you understand how much trouble we're in? They're searching everywhere. The Valrine are threatening war." I know, Jiwan said quickly. "But look at her. Look at the wound on her side." Minji knelt down and examined the cub more closely. The small creature watched her with curious eyes but did not seem afraid. Minji's expression changed as she saw the bandaged injury. "That's not an accidental wound," Minji said quietly. "Exactly," Jiwan replied. "Someone hurt this cub on purpose. If I turn her in now, she might go right back to whoever did this." Minji stood up and paced the small room. Okay, let me think." She was quiet for a moment, then looked at Jiwan. "We need to find out what really happened. If someone deliberately hurt this cub, there should be security footage somewhere." "Can you access that?" Jiwan asked. "Without anyone knowing?" "Maybe," Minji said. "I work in communications. I have access to some systems. But Jiwan, if we're wrong about this, if there's an innocent explanation, we need to come forward immediately." "Agreed," Jiwan said. Over the next several hours, while Jiwan kept the cub quiet and fed, Minji worked on her datapad. She carefully searched through security camera footage from the previous night, looking for any sign of the cub. "Found something," Minji said suddenly. Jiwan moved to look over her shoulder. The footage showed a section of the station's maintenance tunnels. The timestamp was from the previous night. In the image, the small Valrine cub could be seen running through the corridor, clearly frightened and already injured. "Go back," Jiwan said. "What was the cub running from?" Minji rewound the footage. A moment later, a large adult Valrine appeared on screen, moving quickly after the cub. But this was not Ambassador Tala. This Valrine was male, with darker fur and a distinctive scar across his muzzle. "That's Krell," Minji said quietly. "He's part of the Valrine delegation. I've seen him at diplomatic functions." They watched as Krell pursued the cub through the tunnels. The cub was fast but terrified. It ducked into a ventilation shaft too small for Krell to follow. The adult Valrine made a frustrated sound and stalked away. "So Krell was chasing the cub," Jiwan said. "But why? And how did she end up in my quarters?" Minji checked the ventilation system maps on her datapad. "That shaft connects to the human quarters section. The cub must have crawled through until she found your room and got in through the vent." Jiwan looked at the small creature, who was now playing with a piece of fabric from her blanket. The cub had no idea how much danger she was in or how much trouble she had caused. "We need more information," Jiwan said. "Why would Krell chase a cub?" Why would he hurt Ambassador Tala's daughter? I don't know, Minji admitted. But I can dig deeper. There are communication logs, meeting schedules, all kinds of data. If Krell is involved in something suspicious, maybe there's evidence. Before she could continue, there was a sharp knock at their door. Both women froze. Ji-won quickly grabbed the cub and put her back in the storage container, sealing it quietly. Security scan. A voice called from outside. Open the door. Ji-won and Minji exchanged worried looks. Ji-won straightened her clothes and opened the door. Two security officers stood outside, one human and one from a species called the Korthan. Behind them stood a massive Valrine warrior. We're conducting searches of all human quarters, the human officer said. His name tag read Dong-hyun. This will only take a moment. Ji-won stepped aside, trying to keep her expression neutral. Her heart hammered in her chest as the officers entered the small room. The Valrine warrior's nose twitched as he sniffed the air. Could he smell the cub? The officers looked around the room quickly. The human officer, Dong-hyun, checked the bathroom and looked under the bed. His eyes passed over the storage container without much interest. It looked like a normal supply box. The Valrine warrior moved closer to the container. He sniffed again, his eyes narrowing. Ji-won held her breath. Inside the container, she heard the smallest sound. A soft chirp, barely audible. The Valrine's head snapped toward the container. He reached for it. Wait, Dong-hyun said suddenly. He was looking at his data pad with a confused expression. We just got called to level 7. Possible sighting of the cub. The Valrine hesitated, his hand still extended toward the container. Then he growled and followed the other officers out of the room. The door slid shut behind them. Ji-won and Minji stood frozen for a long moment. Then Ji-won let out a shaky breath and opened the storage container. The cub looked up at her and chirped happily, completely unaware of how close they had come to discovery. That was too close, Minji whispered. I know, Ji-won replied. She picked up the cub gently. The small creature nuzzled against her chest, purring softly. Despite everything, despite all the danger and fear, Ji-won felt protective of this tiny being. We need help, Minji said. We can't do this alone. Who can we trust? Ji-won asked. Minji thought for a moment. Dong-hyun, that security officer who just left. I've worked with him before on communications protocols. He's honest and he's smart. Maybe we can bring him in on this. Ji-won looked down at the cub in her arms.